The Hong Kong Hang Seng market up about 4% today. This after Hong Kong Chief Executive Carrie officially withdrew the controversial extradition bill that sparked more than 2 months of rallies and demonstrations. However, protests are still expected to continue because this is only one of the 5 demands that activists are calling for. Was it too little, too late? Let's bring in Michael Hirson from the Eurasia Group. Michael, good to see you. Let's put that question to you. Too little, too late?
I think so, or at least we should say that if this is an opening, it's a very modest one, and there's going to be a lot of pressure on Carrie Lam, the Hong Kong chief executive, to follow this up with some more substantive moves.
I mean, the market took it really positively. Did China blink?
I think it's early to say they blinked. I would say a bit more pragmatism, but the important thing to remember here in terms of the market reaction and China's reaction is that one thing this does do, which I think is significant, is it lowers the risk in the near term of a large-scale crackdown by Beijing. And that's serious, and that's something that the market was rightfully worried about. So this at least buys some more time for perhaps a political dialogue. But I think the tail risk for right now is a bit lower than it was before Carrie Lam made this move.
Ultimately, for the protesters who may still have other demands and ambitious or hopeful expectations of where this could end up, should they realize that ultimately China's never going to compromise on its most important principles and settle somewhere in between?
Well, you could make that argument, certainly. I think for many of the protesters in Hong Kong, this has become an existential issue to some extent with Beijing, and so they are really looking at this as a historic moment to try to draw a line for Beijing. But some of this is also internal Hong Kong, to the extent that one of the key demands of protesters is an inquiry into police actions. So this is not all about Beijing. It's also about Carrie Lam's government and the fact that these protests have really created some significant fissures within Hong Kong civil society.
The fact that the U.S. administration has remained so quiet on this, what does that tell you about President Trump's strategy and what ultimately, if things do calm down as a result of taking away this extradition bill, will mean for U.S.-China relations?
I think the real worry for President Trump was that there would be a serious crackdown, and that would have been something that forced his hand and really prevented any meaningful de-escalation on the trade dispute. If we are at what you could call a sort of low level, I mean, certainly there's serious protests, but we're not talking about a crackdown, then I think President Trump is going to basically continue more or less, and there's still room for trade negotiations. If he decides to go there, we're not optimistic about that either. But I think at this level of unrest, it doesn't really force the U.S. hand too much.
What are the chances that the protests just sort of lose a bit of energy, whether because of this measure or just because of time going on? Is that essentially what the bet is by the Hong Kong authorities?
I think that's the bet by Hong Kong authorities, to some extent by Beijing. It seems like an overly optimistic bet to me. I mean, I think at this point the outlook is a continued stalemate, perhaps at a slightly lower level of intensity now that there's been this opening move. But I don't see a meaningful improvement, and I still see pretty high hurdles for this crisis to be finished anytime soon.
Michael, thank you for joining us with your latest take.